Making sure folks have a common understanding. The Lexicon is extremely helpful to facilitate constructive dialogue about a given initiative. Because if four folks have a different idea about what de-identified data is in a context and everyone leaves the meeting with a completely different idea, you're no further ahead.
You cannot change behaviors, beliefs, and systems of an organization without changing that conversation first with it. Get the organization talking the same language around all things data. Through various training and awareness around data literacy, creating that data mindset, defining what data success looks like.
Hello, and welcome to Future Forward on TheFutureEconomy.ca, a conversation series with Canadian experts where we delve into the pivotal forces shaping Canada's future economy. I'm Sasha Krstic, President of Mastercard Canada. Today's episode shines a spotlight on data privacy and how Canadian businesses and consumers can take steps to protect themselves. As more companies go digital, we've also seen a sharp rise in the number of cyber attacks and breaches since the start of the pandemic. Add to this that consumers are increasingly realizing the value of their personal data. It's more important than ever to develop systems and tools for safeguarding consumer privacy and driving trust in the digital economy. I am joined by two experts who have spent years advising business leaders on how to do just that. Roobi Alam is a partner focusing on privacy and data trust at Ernst & Young. Adam Kardash is a partner and lead on access privacy at Osler, Hoskin Harcourt, LLP. Welcome, Roobi and Adam. Thank you for joining me today. And without further ado, let's get to it. According to Statistics Canada, since 2018, Canadian companies have invested $40 billion in data, databases, data science. And to put that in perspective, that figure is bigger than the investment in the same year in industrial machinery, transportation equipment, and research and development combined. So a very clear indicator that businesses are taking data and data privacy more seriously than ever. So Roobi, let me start with you and say, in your experience, have you seen a shift in the past several years in the way corporations are approaching privacy? And if so, how?
Absolutely, Sasha. I would say the two biggest changes that we're seeing is, number one, a cross-collaboration between the CISO, CDOs, and CPOs. So each of these executives have an obligation to ensure data is complete, accurate, protected throughout the data lifecycle, while still supporting business operations. The second biggest challenge or change that we're seeing is the use of technology to help enable these organizations to create that strong foundation around data visibility, classification, and capability to respond to the various different requirements, such as data subject rights, access rights, retention and deletion schedules, and breach reporting requirements. So overall, I would say those are two significant changes which are really enabling the organizations to transform the way they're managing and protecting data.
Excellent start. And Adam, anything that you would build on that?
I would start by saying that organizations across all sectors are part of a highly dynamic and rapidly evolving data environment. We have an incalculable amount of data that is being processed on a daily basis by now, and this has been exacerbated by affordable analytics and now, of course, the explosion of AI that is processing data of a sheer volume that is often difficult to even contemplate. And at the same time, we have increasingly complex data ecosystems and a concept of data ubiquity, Sasha. Data is everywhere, but that is the nature of our current environment right now. More and more organizations are viewing the asset of data as that, a critical asset, but even more fundamentally, they've recharacterized themselves as data companies. So that is the one fundamental shift. Companies that were fashioning themselves as being in the business of maybe a certain type of financial service, or we even have clients in the bricks and mortar space or in the finance area, they're all data companies. Secondly, there's been an absolute freight train of data regulation that organizations are going to have to deal with. And this is the the focus for years is just on privacy legislation, but now there's privacy legislative reform, which extends that. There's going to be the regulation of AI, which is going to be very, very powerful. There's increasing regulatory scrutiny, and we have this pop of standards and codes of practice. All of these that will collectively serve as a complex web of guardrails for how organizations are going to have to conduct themselves, especially those that view themselves as data companies.
We could probably have a conversation on those shifts in and of themselves. But on this series, we spend a lot of time talking about small and medium-sized businesses because they are, in many ways, the engine of the Canadian economy. Many of them, though, also feel like they have experienced these rigorous privacy protections and are not necessarily financially or operationally able to meet them. Mastercard recently conducted some research that found that 53% of small business owners can't spare or don't feel they can spare the cost of adopting new and innovative privacy tools, which obviously creates risk for them, but risk for the entire ecosystem. So my question is, what are some of the steps that small and medium-sized businesses can take to improve privacy protections for their customers?
There is going to be unquestionably an increasingly intense regulatory burden for companies that process a high amount of personal information. That is a fact, and that will continue. This is a cost of doing business. If you're a data company, the cost of doing business will be ensure that you comply with the regulation and the self-regulation and the codes of practice, the guardrails for processing personal information respectfully. This will be critical for companies, small and large, who want to be viewed as trusted service providers, vis-a-vis the manner in which they treat data. If you're not a trusted provider, you don't have that, then whether it's a consumer, whether it's another business, over time, that's going to hurt the long-term sustainability of the business operation. Now, part of your question asks a very important question from a public policy perspective. Could there be, for instance, governmental support for small business? And I think as a matter of public policy, the answer to that should be yes. If the future of a large part of our economy is going to be the digital economy, and trust is so important for the digital economy as set out by ISED in the digital charter, then one would think that there'd be a cascading series of benefits for government to initiate certain programs that incentivize privacy compliance, information security, as well as responsible AI. In other words, let's not just pass legislation that drops a hammer and sets rules with burdens and potential penalties. Let's incentivize organizations for doing so. And I'm sure there's a whole array of potential opportunities or policy.
And Roobi, just to build on that, I'm interested in your perspective on, Adam mentioned government, are there other partners or sectors that can better support small businesses in the area of privacy? Tech sector, finance sector, academia, other ways that we can support such an incredible engine of our economy?
Right. I would say, Sasha, what we're seeing is that a lot of the technology that's already out there that organizations, even small and medium sized, that are using to help support security, data governance, their CRM, or even marketing tools, these vendors themselves are recognizing that there's a need for privacy requirements. So they're actually building capability within these existing tools. And so a lot of these clients are not understanding or may not be looking at the existing tool set that they may have in their ecosystem to see where can we potentially leverage or layer on and complement kind of using these existing technologies to help support these emerging requirements. So I would say, as a first step for these businesses is to really, again, go back and collaborate with your other stakeholders, see what you currently have in your ecosystems. And they would be surprised to see that there is a lot of tools and support and technology that they already have that can help support them start building out that privacy program and using these existing technologies to help enable and automate some of those requirements.
That's a great call out, Roobi, because we often hear that small business owners feel like they have the weight of their entire business on their shoulders, from finance to marketing to operations to customer engagement. So reminding them that they actually have partners in place today that are also thinking about privacy and leveraging that as a first step is a really valuable takeaway. One of the things that consumers are using, and a lot more these days, is generative AI. And so as we see that usage increase, and to the value exchange points, consumers see value from using Gen AI. Thoughts on its impacts on consumer data and privacy. So how is AI adoption changing the privacy landscape?
So although AI is an emerging technology, as Adam and yourself mentioned, the basic principles of privacy still apply, except, for example, transparency, choice and consent, the ethical use of that data. However, since AI is now making decisions on behalf of humans, about humans, you also need to add these principles around how the technology is being built. So like the privacy by design methodology developed by Ann Cavoukian over 20 years ago, we now need a new responsible AI methodology that looks at principles such as, is the AI system unbiased? Is the data feeding into this AI system resilient? Are the AI results explainable? Is it transparent to your customer that the data is captured and how it's being used? And lastly, is the performance of the AI meeting your stakeholder expectation? So it's now kind of layering on additional principles around from a technology standpoint versus compliance type requirements that privacy typically focuses on.
Under privacy laws now, there's a principle where organizations can only collect, use, and disclose for purposes that a reasonable person would consider appropriate. The question, and it's a very important question, is when you think of the types of data processing we're engaged with right now, and that will in the future, we will be engaged in, and this is going to only intensify over the next few years. The question is, what is reasonable and appropriate? And that's a really important question for civil society, academia, regulatory authorities, businesses, and individuals for us to grapple with and think about. And then, what are we all talking about right now? How do you articulate in meaningful terms? How do you operationalize meaningfully, in a fiscally appropriate way as well, responsible AI? How do we really do that? We're talking about it. We have a lot of instruments for it. Everyone knows, and I think there's a great buy-in, that we have to engage in responsible AI. But how do we really do that?
To Adam's point, one of the challenges right now is, defining kind of what a framework looks like for your organization. I think step one is AI is a very big word, and it looks differently for every organization. So first, really defining what does AI mean to your organization? What are some of those use cases? We'll then help to at least form a working group, if you will, with various different stakeholders that will be a combination of the CPO, their CDO. Right now, it is a struggle most organizations are facing because there is no direct mandate under any of the existing executives. Right now, to define the principles and the framework, it is the CPO and the CDO that are being turned to say, hey, can you at least help the organization start this journey, this initiative, about understanding really what AI means to our organization, understanding based on the use cases that we have today and potentially tomorrow, build out what does that framework look like? What are some of those operational controls that we can actually put within the business processes to help ensure that what we're saying in a framework or a policy is actually being applied?
Adam, anything that you would add to that?
In one form or the other, those individuals in an organization that are touching data will bear some responsibility, hopefully clearly articulated, but responsibility for implementing what would be the organization's trust model. If you don't have that, you're going to have a governance structure that's going to be strained, because what will end up happening is you'll have the decisions, for example, the green light, red light, residing with individuals and creating tension within an organization. But if there's data stewards and champions, in the privacy world, we talk about that, if these are implemented and across the organization, then you're going to have folks across organizations talking the same language, and you'll realize the respectful treatment of data in a way that is going to be much more effective for the organization long term.
A really important notion about creating this common lexicon, because increasingly as data becomes pervasive in our organizations and in our daily lives, it cannot sit only with individuals across companies to figure out how to use it, how to protect it. It's going to become an important part of companies, the fabric of every company.
Sasha, if it's okay, I'd like to pick up on that word about the need, or the phrase, the need to pick up on a common lexicon. This is a daily challenge that we see organizations dealing with. There are lots of terms, phrases, and concepts that remain elusive for individuals within organizations and sometimes organizationally. One example of this is, what is the distinguishing features between data that you would say is personal information compared to de-identified, compared to pseudonymized, compared to anonymized data? And I can tell you that this is a challenge. There's answers to this, but making sure folks have a common understanding. The lexicon is extremely helpful to facilitate constructive dialogue about a given initiative. Because if four folks have a different idea about what de-identified data is in a context, and everyone leaves the meeting with a completely different idea, you're no further ahead. Like it's a very important point, Sasha.
For me, it's more around what needs to happen to change the culture within an organization. And you just mentioned that having that common language across the organization. So when we work with our clients to help drive that privacy culture change management, one of the first questions we ask is there a collective conversation within your organization? As a result, you cannot change behaviors, beliefs, and systems of an organization without changing that conversation first with it. Therefore, usually culture and data literacy are the top two roadblocks for privacy leaders. So how do we change this? Step one is to get the organization talking the same language around all things data, through various training and awareness around data literacy, creating that data mindset, defining what data success looks like. Step two then would be for the various teams led by the CDO or their CPO to work with the other leaders to agree on what are some of the key behaviors that need to be eliminated and the ones that need to be reinforced to operationalize that culture of privacy. So this could be then translated into behaviors that are specifically tied to concrete actions, agree on key moments when these behaviors need to be expressed or when it should be not seen or banned. And most importantly, validate how, as an organization, you will measure the effectiveness of that change within your culture. What are your KPIs or the business outcomes that will help measure that the change is actually effective?
For years, organizations have been putting out vision and mission statements and maybe their corporate values. And there's been some discussion over the years. Certainly, certain companies have put forth a concept of data values, which might be understood as corporate values, but applied or transposed into the data context. My sense is that can be a game-changing concept for organizations to articulate, have, as per a previous question, you said a common lexicon and understanding of what those data values mean. If you say the customer is first, for instance, what exactly does that mean for the information security team, for the growth team, for the marketing team, for HR, for customer service response? In other words, articulate that with some granularity so that you have an idea about how each of these different units or business units would be operationalizing that value. So when you're sitting around the table discussing with folks from different business units, but you all speak with similar values, then you're going to get to a place quicker or likely better than you would if otherwise that's not the case. And I've been surprised, Sasha, because this is a concept that was picking up some steam, maybe 5-10 years ago, certainly in thought leadership fora, and hasn't been at the forefront that I think it could be. And I think with responsible AI, we're going to start seeing that in one form or another.
I love that we ended with behavior and values becoming the fundamental starting point, if you will, for companies to really embed safe and secure usage of data for their employees, for their business, and for their end customers. So with that, I'm very confident. So thanks to you, Roobi and Adam, that our listeners and our viewers are coming out of this discussion with a much better understanding of the role of business and consumers in safeguarding privacy, a lot around the forthcoming government legislation and the potential impacts of AI. So to our viewers and our listeners, let me say thanks for tuning in to this Future Forward series hosted by me, Sasha Krstic, President of Mastercard Canada. I hope you're enjoying our conversations with Canadian thought leaders and industry experts on the forces and trends shaping Canada's future economy and what we need to do to ensure that Canada stays at the forefront. I'd love to hear from you, so let us know your thoughts on the topics we've discussed in the comments section below. And to be notified on the next release in the series, subscribe to this channel and to the TheFutureEconomy.ca newsletter and social. Links are in the description. I'm Sasha Krstic. Thanks for joining us and see you next time.